Today, we have a very special episode for World Tourism Day, the 27th of September. World Tourism Day's purpose is to foster awareness among the international community of the importance of tourism and its social, cultural, political, and economic value. I chat with 3 industry experts about the impact of COVID-19 on the travel industry and what needs to be done for us to move to a more sustainable and responsible tourism practices in the future. We start off with Ged Brown, the founder and CEO of Low Season Traveller. We discuss what travellers can expect when going on their next holiday and the importance of travel in promoting international cooperation and respect for each other in times of division. Next up, Warren Pearson joins us from Pan-African Safari Guides and explains the impact that tourism has on wildlife conservation. We focus on poaching for animal products as souvenirs, to the responsibility of the governments to create management plans that encourage visitors and tourism, but protects wildlife without the impact of over-tourism. Finally, we chat to Chris Flynn, the President and CEO of the World Tourism Association for Cultural and Heritage, about the integral role of tourism in protecting culture and heritage. With travellers changing the way that they travel, we discuss if staying in private accommodation will reduce the amount travellers engage in local culture, and if virtual events are the new way to go when promoting intangible heritage. Here's the episode. Hope you enjoy. Tourism is facing its biggest challenge in living memory. We have seen the impact already that COVID-19 has had on the travel industry, with every region around the world seeing no growth in tourism for the first time in decades. While many countries slowly reopen their borders and welcoming back tourists, the discussion that we need to have, Ged, is what travel is going to look like in the future. What can travellers expect when going internationally again, and what needs to be done that tourism is restarted in a responsible and sustainable manner. It's clear that after months of isolation and quarantine, travel is the leisure activity people are missing out on the most. According to Google, in August, the top queries were all related to when and where people can travel to right now. 45% of the top 100 questions typed into Google related to travel focused on the impact of COVID-19 and the desire to travel safely and as soon as possible. So, Ged, I want to ask you, what can travellers expect the future of travel to look like?
It's the $1 million question, Kate, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you're right. We talk about supply and demand in different products, including travel, and the demand seemingly at the moment for travel is at an all-time low, as in people booking travel, and we know that that's because of restrictions due to COVID, etc. But you're also right in that the desire for people to travel and experience this wonderful world of ours has never been greater. And that's not just anecdotal. There's data which supports that, which we look at in the industry. So you have data from companies like Skyscanner and TripAdvisor, and they give an indication of the sentiment of people out there. And what's really clear is, first of all, everybody, myself included, really wants to travel again, and we want to experience the world. I think what we all need to be accepting of, and this is both within the travel industry and as consumers, travelers ourselves, is that the world of travel and the experience of travel as we know it is over. That experience is over. So as going through airports, everything changed after 9/11, which was a one-off single event. With COVID-19, it's not a one-off event. This is something which is going to go on for quite some time, because we've had some form of virus, with us since, probably about as early as sort of 2000, 2003, when we had SARS. So there's always been a strain of a virus. There's just that this one is, way more impactful on the whole world. So the travel experience is going to have to take into consideration that there's a risk of these viruses for the future. So I think travel as we know it is going to be different. We're going to have to get used to a little bit more of the social distancing. certainly for the short term, we're going to have to get used to, face masks, which, by the way, for a lot of I know a lot of our audience rather are in the States and in Europe. And we haven't been big on the face masks, but if you travel
Really?
to Asia, no, not really. No, sorry, in the past. I mean, pre-COVID.
Right.
But in the past sort of 10, 15 years, I suppose since SARS, I've been traveling, all around Asia over the past 10, 15 years, and face masks are incredibly common, even pre-COVID. So I think that there was that sort of element of, we need to be careful here, and I think people were thinking because of SARS, but that. Although the sort of peak of SARS was in 2003, 2004, the effects of that stayed with an awful lot of the population in Asia throughout the past 10, 15 years. And I think that that's going to be a legacy, which we're going to see due to COVID-19. A lot more people will be wearing face masks when they're in airports, possibly when they're on planes, and maybe sometimes in destination. But that doesn't need to change anything, Kate. And, I've sort of said to a few people recently, if I'm going to, social distance, and when I'm in crowded areas, if I'm going to have to wear a face mask in January, then rather do that here in Manchester in the UK, which, by the way, in January is pretty miserable, I can tell you.
Yeah.
I'd rather do that in Melbourne, frankly. Why not? I know probably Melbourne might not want me at that stage, depending on where you guys are up to. But, if I have to take those precautions, then it doesn't change the fact that I want to experience the world. I want to, engage with different people, albeit socially distanced, but I want to understand how different people live around the world. I want to understand the different cultures and the different experiences which are on offer. And you know what? If I have to wear a face mask in order to do that, and jump through a few hoops at the airport and on the planes, then honestly, I'm okay with that. And I think that's what, as a population of travelers, that's what we need to be prepared for. It's not going to be the same, I think, in the future.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's really a small price to pay to wear a mask to be able to travel again.
Yeah, I mean, I'd pay it willingly, but yet still, Kate, I think it's interesting at the moment in the supermarkets here, everybody's supposed to wear face masks, and an awful lot of people don't. And I think it's at what point governments around the world, decide whether or not this is actually a guideline, as in, we advise that you wear face masks versus you have to wear face masks. For me, I think it's all about risk. And at the moment, I think a lot of the governments around the world are trying to eliminate risk so that there's zero risk of COVID spreading. And I don't think you can do that. And I think we're already learning that. So where I live in Manchester, we've had an enhanced lockdown for the past 7 weeks, and the cases have gone up. So, it's not making much difference. So for me, I think collectively, we need to, not just in the travel industry, by the way, but, across all industries, stop trying to fight it. Stop trying to, make out like we're going to try and kill this virus once and for all. It's not going to happen. There's going to be some form of a virus, whether it be COVID-19 or another one in the future. We need to figure out how we can, I guess, carry on our lives despite the fact that there will always be this risk. We can minimize the risk, but there will always be a risk. And that's the nature of life. It's all, there's always going to be some element of risk in life. And I think we just need to be more comfortable with that element of risk.
Yeah, I completely agree. You touched on a point there that obviously every country is going to have different rules, different regulations. Some countries are going for herd immunity, some countries are going for eradication, and it's something that travelers are going to have to make sure that they do their research before they do go, to understand all of the requirements necessary to enter the countries. But it also leads to my next question that, since COVID has taken over our world and our lives, really, we have seen huge division in our world like never before. Countries closing their borders, countries having to put their citizens first, as well as a huge spotlight on race inequality in the world. How important is tourism for bringing people back together and promoting solidarity and trust for global cooperation?
That's a really great point, Kate, and I think that's possibly the biggest advantage, I suppose, or benefit of travel and the travel industry, and tourism, I guess, is tourism does bring people together. when we travel to these different destinations, we have a greater understanding of the people in the destinations, the culture, their background, how they live. And when we understand that fully, then we're bonded by that, and we're brought together by that. And I think that's been the biggest challenge with, you said it at the outset there, the divisions that we're seeing around the world right now. That's what scares me, actually, is if we're not traveling and if we are getting more closed off, then I believe that there's a risk in some way to global peace and understanding and harmony. And that's why it's absolutely critical that we do keep traveling where possible, and that we do, try to remain close to all of our different neighbours around the world, and still try to understand those neighbours. And I think, we've tried to do a lot with, I guess in every industry, people have been doing calls like we're doing, Kate. We've never met each other. We speak to each other quite often, and we try and sort of be connected that way. And I think it's and that's great. And, thank God we've got Zoom and Skype and FaceTime and everything else.
Thank God that we've had the internet during the pandemic. I don't know what I would have done without it.
What would it have been like without it? We need to count our blessings for technology on that. But at the same time, for me, and I don't know, I'm still wrestling whether it's a generational thing, because I wasn't brought up with that technology. I'm 50, now 50 tomorrow. And I don't know if it's my generation or whether it's a reality, but I think nothing takes the place of face-to-face, of that literally breaking bread. And I know that you're passionate about cuisine, and I am too, although I'm not the best cook in the world. But there's something about sharing a meal with people from different cultures and different backgrounds and enjoying their cuisine. And it's that literal, breaking of bread. And when we do that face-to-face, we've got a shared experience. And I think that travel is important because it allows us to have a shared and very real, tangible experience. And I'm not sure that can be replicated on Zoom or Skype or any of the technology. But like I said, I don't know if that's just a generational thing, or whether, the people who were born digital, whether they can form those kind of bonds in the same way that for me, I can only do it face to face.
I guess it's something that we're going to have to see in the future, because I know for me, I'm definitely fatiguing with video calls and sharing meals over FaceTime. And so, I'm 26, different generation, and I am incredibly over, looking at people through a screen and not having that physical contact. But I think it'll be interesting what the impact will be in a few years down the line if we are more comfortable doing that, and if it actually keeps us more connected because we have had to have that experience and force ourselves to do it to stay connected with each other.
Yeah. I think it's it'll be interesting to see. I think it's one of those where you say, time will tell. I just hope that I hope that we don't have to give it too much time, and I hope that we can get back to traveling as best we can and as safe as we can. It won't be perfect in the near future, because if ever there was a time that the world needs travel and tourism, it is absolutely right now. And we tend to be isolated from it. We think of ourselves, when we talk about travel and tourism, we almost selfishly talk about, we're thinking about ourselves as the travelers, quite rightly. And, the big problem with this COVID is I can't go and, see you in Melbourne, Kate, and I can't go and experience Victoria and all of the many joys that are in Victoria. But the other side of this is you've got a whole load of businesses and communities in Victoria and in Melbourne which survive via an awful lot international tourism, and they're really, really suffering. So, actually, for me, I'm even more determined to, as soon as I can, within the government restrictions, get out there and start traveling. I absolutely will start traveling. And if it's a slightly different experience than I would have had pre-COVID, well, that's okay. But I know that there are communities which, need tourism, and they survive and thrive off tourism. And for them, the past 6-7 months have been absolutely disastrous. And I think that's why, as travelers, we've almost got a responsibility. If we're that passionate about travel and exploring the world, and seeing all that the world has to offer, now's the time we need to actually make sure and redouble our efforts to get out there as safely as we can within the restrictions, and make sure that we do still travel. Because if we don't, quite honestly, that there won't be a tourism infrastructure to support us in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yep, I completely agree. I really hope that travellers do understand that it is not just for them when they travel. It's so important to the communities, to cultural heritage and intangible heritage that we do go. And on a more practical note, what do you think the changes are going to be in the way people travel? So do you think that people are going to be taking shorter trips, going to less countries? What do you think people are going to do?
I think the feeling that I'm getting out there from speaking to a lot of different industry partners in aviation, in hospitality, the hotel industry, the feeling that we're getting is that people are going to take longer trips. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Is one, we're going to be jumping through more hoops at the airport. We all hate the airport experience for the most part. It's not fun. We've got security checks and everything else. I think that certainly initially there's going to be more hoops to jump through at the airport. So that experience is probably not going to get better. And I say that in the past as an airport man. I've seen more than my fair share of airports. But with respect, the airport is the gateway to the destination. And it's those kind of hoops that you jump through. It's not fun. You just want to get out of the airport, really. So I think we're going to see more hoops to jump through in terms of getting to the destination. I think that as a result of that, we will try to spend longer in the destinations. And I think those short trips, I think that it's going to be a little bit more challenging. I don't know whether people are going to take those short trips quite as easily as they did do in the past. I suppose a lot depends on the way in which the low-cost carriers in particular, the way in which they adapt to this situation and how easy or not they can make it for us to do those short trips. But I think, generally speaking, I think people are going to try and take longer trips. I can see that villas, cottages, probably Airbnbs, private residences, I think they're going to do very well. And I think people are going to feel more secure and it being slightly lower risk if they're traveling as a family unit and staying in a contained unit, very nice contained unit, maybe like a villa with a pool or something like that, versus staying in a really busy hotel with buffet meals and all of that kind of stuff. So I think, that's a way in which things will change. And I think that's a way in which people will feel more comfortable traveling in the future. But I think overall, I think we'll still be able to have those wonderful experiences. I think that the experiences will be out there that we can enjoy. It's just going to be slightly different. I think a lot of the, if you look at some of the tourism attractions, they're going to have to manage the visitors in a way in which I've been calling for it for the past 20 years, actually. And I wanted them to manage their tourism flows in order to guard against over-tourism. But now, because of COVID-19 and other viral threats, they need to manage it because they can't have too many people in there because there'll be a greater risk of virus transmission. So a lot of these destinations are going to have to manage more carefully their tourism flows, which might mean that we might need to book our visit to the Acropolis possibly before we even travel, or our trip to the Colosseum before we even travel, because they're going to have to manage their numbers. You won't just be able to show up and get in there. By the way, unless you travel during the low season. During the low season, it's probably not going to be as crowded, and that's the beauty of I guess what we're trying to do with the low season traveler is it's about traveling during the low seasons when it's not as congested and your tourism presence is more welcome. So I think that's a few ways in which I can foresee the changes happening, and it's not all bad case. It's not about sort of doom and gloom. It's just about different, and I think. We all know that there's a curve of change and, there's 7 steps to change, and it's almost like the curve of grief, where you have I think first of all, it's denial, it's anger, and it's all of these stages until you get to acceptance. And when you get to acceptance, that's when you move on and thrive. And I think a lot of us, even within the travel industry, we're still on denial. We're still on like, nope, it's going to be all normal in 2021. And, it's not. It's going to be different. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be bad different. It's just going to be different. And that's okay. Change necessarily means the end of one phase and the beginning of a new phase. What we all need to do collectively as travelers and as the travel and tourism industry is focus on this new beginning. And that's what it is. It's a new beginning. It doesn't necessarily need to be bad. It can actually be great for all kinds of reasons, for the environment, for guarding against over-tourism, for having responsible, sustainable tourism practices. This can be a really good new beginning. So let's not focus on what was pre-COVID-19. Let's look at the new beginning that we've got ahead of us. And I'm quite optimistic.
I think that is a beautiful way to end, Ged. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much, Kate. Really appreciate it. And have a great day in Melbourne.
You too. Have a great day. And happy birthday.
Thank you very much indeed. Appreciate it.
Hi, Warren. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Kate. My pleasure.
So, tourism is often talked about as one of the most important components for wildlife conservation. Could you just talk to us about the connection between tourism and wildlife?
Yeah, it's a big connection, and it's something that is vital, particularly within an African context. Having people come out here into Africa to witness the wildlife that's here is this is what keeps the wildlife alive. People will say that Africa or the wildlife needs to pay for itself to survive, which is a horrible way to think about it. But to have the surrounding communities that live on the periphery of a lot of these protected areas, they need to see the benefit. And they need to understand why these animals need to be looked after, why these wilderness areas need to be looked after. And I've always said this, and I've said this to a few people where, people want to donate money to an organization, and it's like, fantastic, do that. But do yourself a favor and actually get your feet on the ground and show the communities and show the people that are living there that people from all over the world are coming to see the people or see the animals that are living on your doorstep. And this is the vital link. When you're living out in the middle of nowhere, to you the world's a massive place, but when you have these people coming out and looking at these wildlife and spending time with you and your family in your traditional village, wherever it might be, this is why these animals are protected. When you have the local communities that are wanting to protect them.
And I know it's interesting that people are looking to donate money, but it seems to benefit everyone better if they get to visit and be there and see where their money is going and the impact that they are making. I think for me personally, that is definitely my preference of going to the place rather than just donating money.
Absolutely. I think it means so much more as well when you can say you've been to a place and you can see the benefits that you being there is actually helping. And I've dealt with people all over the world that they've said, well, I want to contribute, but they don't really know what they're contributing to, and when they get on the ground and they can actually see the faces of the people, they can see the children, they can see the conservation efforts from relocating wildlife, they can see all of that. And this is what you're helping to do. This is what you're contributing. And by you being here it's a massive impact.
And with the reduction of tourism, in the past 6 months because of COVID, have you seen an impact on wildlife conservation? Has it been able to sustain itself?
Sadly not. There's a lot of statistics out there about how poaching has increased, how communities are suffering because a lot of the conservancies, the private conservancies that take over land sort of give back to those communities through tourism. So that's impacted all in a negative way, and it's sadly, poaching has increased massively, and it's more for bushmeat. People don't have the jobs. They tourism is a huge employer in Africa, and when people aren't getting the money, and it's not just immediate employment, it's the families that go down the line. For me, that is what people don't think about at the end of the day. And sadly, this has increased bushmeat poaching. When it comes down to sort of larger profile animals, elephants, rhinos, those kind of animals, yeah, some people say that the lockdowns actually helped. They say in South Africa, definitely it has helped. People haven't been allowed out their houses, or why are you out? You're not allowed to be out. So that has closed poaching down a little bit. But yeah, when you talk about sort of small bushmeat and subsistence poaching, that has increased.
It's interesting you talk about poaching, because tourism has had, unfortunately, a detrimental impact on wildlife in the past. Souvenirs that are often made from illegal animal and plant products like ivory and tortoise shells and things like that being sold, to customers, millions of customers a year. In your view, how can tourism help stop this industry from reigniting when tourism does start up again? Is it through greater regulation or more awareness from travelers and customers buying those products?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It is. It's people being made aware. It's people. It's education. It's people just having to understand, and I think they need to ask the questions. Where does this come from? Where does it? And don't just take the answer as gospel truth. It's I always say to people that travel with me, don't go and buy porcupine quills when you see them in markets, because you don't know where they've come from. And everyone will tell you, no, they've been harvested, they've been farmed, or whatever it is, or whatever it might be, whether it's, as you say, tortoise shells or ostrich feathers. To me, it's rather not buy animal products at all. At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, and I know people say they want to help support the local people that are selling these things, but at the end of the day, you don't know where they come from. And I've questioned a lot of people on elephant hair bracelets, for example. Elephant hair bracelets are a big thing in a lot of the curio stores and the local markets around Africa. And every time I say, "Where did you get this from?" No, and you can see sort of the answer, sort of like
around.
Back. Exactly. They start thinking, "No, hang on, no one normally asks us this." And it's just, to me, it's don't buy. It's plain and simple, don't buy. And I know people want to take home a little souvenir of this or that. And if I see a porcupine quill that's lying on the ground in the bush, yeah, I'll pick up a porcupine quill and I'll give it to a kid or to someone that's on the vehicle. I can say, there, keep that one porcupine quill, because that, has come from an animal that's lost it through natural means. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's education. It's just telling people not to buy this stuff, and just stay away from buying anything that comes from an animal at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Yeah, I think that awareness needs to be spread, because people do often believe what they're told. And as well with wanting to help supporting the community and the people selling them, they can often just overlook it and think that they are doing the right thing, when really them purchasing it, the impact is so much greater than what they see in front of them.
Exactly.
So other nature-based destinations like Galapagos Islands and Costa Rica are starting to limit tourism and increase sustainable practices. In 2017, Africa saw an increase of arrivals by 9%, which equated to 63 million people. What does Africa as a continent need to do to both sustain, protect, and fund wildlife conservation? And how do we implement this post-COVID in a safe manner?
I think COVID's almost been a blessing in disguise from that side of it, and always try and look at the positive out of this pandemic. Yes, we want tourist numbers in Africa, but I think you have to know how to control them, and that comes down to the governments. And governments like Rwanda, for example, Botswana, they leading the charge here with low impact but high cost destinations. And it's I think that's the only way going forward from an African perspective, to not have over tourism in these areas. Other countries, Tanzania, Kenya, South Africa, Zimbabwe, they've all gone for a different sort of approach to having tourist numbers. And I think it's more of that short-term, short-sighted kind of approach of let's get as many people in as possible. But the detriment to the natural vegetation, to the wildlife is massive. It's huge. And I hope, and I really do hope that, countries like Rwanda, like, Botswana, they lead the charge, and other countries, they take hold of this and they follow suit.
It's interesting that you say that COVID has been a blessing in disguise, because I view it a little bit that way as well. Obviously, it has had an extremely negative impact, jobs, livelihoods, and things like that. But I think for the tourism industry, we almost needed this hit to refresh ourselves and really recognize what needed to be done. And it has given us that chance to stop, reflect, and try and move on from what we were doing and create this new way of travel. And I think it's going to take a long time to adapt to it. And, people that aren't in the tourism industry are going to take longer to recognize that. But I think that's the one silver lining that we can look at, is that this is hopefully going to bring us a better, more sustainable travel.
I think you've once again hit it on the head. I mean, it's. I mean, I'm being hit hard currently by it, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm sitting here since March, and I haven't worked since March, basically. It's a tough one to swallow, but I think in the long term, and I think I am looking as far ahead as I can here, is that it has been a blessing, and I think that we need to stop and rethink and go forward in a completely different route. And I think those that are willing to change are going to thrive, and I think those that are wanting to stick to the old normal are going to be left behind, sadly. It's going to be a very different world to travel in, wherever you're going in the world. So this COVID, I keep looking at it as a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, we have to stay positive in times like this with so much negativity around us. We have to smile.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Warren, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been fantastic, and I hope that everyone can learn from this and really understand that their impact on wildlife conservation in Africa is really important, and come visit as soon as they can.
Come visit. It's been our pleasure. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Chris. It's great to have you on.
Absolute pleasure, Kate, and thanks for inviting me to be part of the podcast.
No worries. So the first question I want to ask you is, tourism is integral in protecting cultural heritage, both physical sites and intangible heritage. Can you talk to us about the important connection between cultural heritage and tourism?
It's an interesting question. And to be perfectly honest with you, I think there's a perception out there, Kate, that tourism does protect and preserve the cultural heritage assets of the world. But in reality, what we've actually found is that hasn't been the case. That the protections that should be in place, or the policies that should be in place, have been to some degree lacking in many, many areas. And what that has resulted in is things like over-tourism, the exploitation of tourism assets, particularly in emerging destinations where the custodians of maybe some of these fragile assets are not really aware of what's required in terms of developing a tourism economy. So what we're hoping for moving forward, and particularly as we regenerate and re-emerge from COVID-19, is that there will be a recognition that the place of cultural heritage in tourism is critically important. You know, there are statistics out there that basically show that I think it from memory, when you look at UNWTO, they reckon that 47% of people traveling have some form of cultural heritage experience, and is one of the key motivators of people's or why people travel. And this is symptomatic of all the studies that we've looked at. So when we start to look at the growth of tourism, say prior to the onset of COVID-19, and we saw an increase in volume, year-on-year increase in volume of tourist arrivals globally in 2019, that grew by 4%. So if you look at the 1.5 billion tourists that were traveling then, what that basically says to you is that 705 million people who are currently traveling or were prior to COVID-19 had some form of cultural heritage experience during their travels. So to think that there are no protections in place, or very, very little protections in place prior to COVID-19, is mind-blowing, really. So what we, as from the World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage, what we do and what we are doing right now is working with governments, working with destinations, with tourism stakeholders, to ensure that these protections are put in place and adhered to before we start to see the reemergence of travel, because certainly we do not want to go back to some of the issues we faced prior.
I spoke to a little bit about Warren about how actually COVID almost has a silver lining, and it's really important to bring positives out of this really negative time. And it really is a chance for the tourism industry to restart again, and for these locations to be able to manage these destinations so we don't have the impact of over-tourism. And I hope that that impact, comes down to with cultural heritage as well, and that these destinations learn how to manage it properly, so that the impact is a lot less from tourists and it's much more of a positive, sustainable and responsible impact that we are having on that cultural heritage.
Well, there are some similarities. We look at the extinction of species, the extinction of animals. Well, think about the extinction of culture. And that's what we're dealing with. It's when over-tourism, or when a lack of responsible tourism practices and sustainable tourism practices are prevalent in terms of your tourism economic growth, what we start to see is the erosion of these assets. And when damage is done, for the most part, it can't be repaired. Now, depending on what we're talking about, it could be something that has occurred over thousands of years. Once that asset is gone, it becomes extinct. It can't be regrown. It can't be planted. It's simply gone. And what has actually happened in the past is, in certain areas of the world, when let's say unscrupulous operators have been exploiting some of these assets, once they have made their money, and once they have made the negative impact on that particular environment, they'll just move on to the next. So there's many similarities in terms of the extinction of animals with the extinction of culture. And it's incredibly important that we protect these assets, because in a homogenized world where everything is the same to some degree, the only thing that we have that is truly unique is culture. That is the invisible skin that we all wear that tells people who we are. And that is the thing that needs to be celebrated and protected, not just for now, but for future generations. So just like the protection of species, we need to ensure that moving forward, we have the protection of culture and the protection of the ancestry and the assets that have been created over time.
I think that's a really good comparison, comparing wildlife to culture. I know a lot of people don't think necessarily culture about it as much, because you can't touch it, you can't grab it. Obviously you can see sights and things like that, but I think it's really good to make that comparison, that it can become extinct and we really do need to maintain it.
I'll just say though, just there, It's true. It's exactly true what you're saying. It's something that is always taken for granted. And it's not until we open our eyes. I've often said with Ged from Low Season Travel, where I grew up, I was really lucky. As a little kid, across the road from where I lived was a Roman bridge, which dated from about 600 AD. Wow. Now, as a child, right, it's just somewhere to play. It has no significance, no historical significance. But as you get older, you start to understand just how incredibly important these rocks that make up this bridge, just how important they are. And there is a lack of recognition, in my opinion, on the true value of culture, both from a historical and ancestral aspect, but also from an economic value aspect. Recently here in Australia, as you may recall, Kate, a mining company blew up a 46,000-year-old sacred site, Aboriginal sacred site.
Devastating.
And absolutely, a complete lack of care, a complete lack of interest. 46,000 years gone in the space of a couple of seconds. That's what we're talking about, because I say you can never get this back. So it's incredibly important. And what I would love to see, particularly from the travelers who support low season travel, are people who genuinely want to have an immersive experience that's authentic and genuine, that they become the protectors of culture and assets. Tourism has the unique opportunity to be the protector of cultural heritage assets moving forwards. And that comes down to both the industry and the people that are consuming it. So anyway, I interrupted your question, so I apologize for that. Let's move on.
Okay. So do you think people are going to be traveling in a different way? I spoke to Ged briefly that people might be staying a little bit more in Airbnbs, private villas, and that might potentially lead to less interaction and connection with the culture because people are looking to just stay in their bubble or isolate themselves. Do you think that that's almost a threat to cultural heritage and being able to preserve it in the future?
It's difficult simply because we don't have a crystal ball, but people through concerns, natural concerns of COVID, will travel in new ways moving forward, and we'll start to see that as we start to see the re-emergence of travel and tourism around the world. But there will be a natural sort of distancing from the surge of tourism that we generally see at some of the resorts, say in the Mediterranean. I think from my own research and my own perspective, is that one thing is clear is that the motivations for travel have changed already. People are going to travel in a new way. Whereas we used to take tourism for granted, or many people took tourism for granted, then, I think to a large degree, it will almost be seen as a privilege. And again, that is something that I've been championing for many years. Tourism and the ability to travel is a privilege. Not everybody has to do it. So people will travel less. It will probably cost more, certainly for the first few years. So they will want to experience more. And what they will want to experience is these new immersive, for want of a better word, authentic experiences. So the ability to travel safely within a place, to enjoy or become connected with a local community through staying at an Airbnb or something like that, I think will become very popular. The other thing that we'll see is there will be a surge in things like self-drive and camper vans around the world, because again, majority of people will want to stay away from big crowds. So in terms of cultural heritage, I think it's probably a good news story. And this is the time now for destinations to really start to plan properly. We've been allowed as an industry just to grow in any way that we wish, whether it's 6 cruise ships arriving at the same time in Venice, or whether it's low-cost airlines, sort of having surges into key popular destinations. This is going to change, and it can only change for the better. But as an industry, we have a responsibility to drive it in a way that is sustainable and responsible, because we certainly can't afford to go back to the way it was.
Absolutely. I want to ask a little bit about intangible cultural heritage. So many practices have had to be postponed, such as cultural festivals, food festivals, concerts and gatherings, which often require many people to be in the same confined space. And I know you said you don't have a crystal ball, but you are an expert in this area, so I am going to ask the question. How do we adapt to still continuing these traditions in a safe manner? Or is this sort of intangible heritage and festivals going to be the last sort of activity that we are going to be able to participate in?
Well, it's quite interesting because it's something I've thought about. When we look at these kind of intangible cultural heritage environments that we're talking about, whether it's a festival, whether it's a music festival or dance festival, they do play an absolute critical part in the whole sort of cultural heritage tourism or CHT sphere. I was contacted only this week by a group from Zambia. And I've been in contact with these people for quite some time. And they were asking me in previous weeks advice on what to do precisely on this issue. Mm-hmm. So I shared with them some ideas and some knowledge from different parts of the Pacific cultures, in particular, some of the festivals that happen in Papua New Guinea. And I showed them the stark contrast between the various different tribal groups in Papua New Guinea. And said, there's an opportunity here to showcase this, not in a physical sense, but in a virtual sense. And we can build virtual festivals, if you will, where we remain isolated. We can have a dance group that performs in a particular area that's recorded and shared. And the other thing about this, if we do it in a virtual sense and we do it properly, is that we can export that far wider than a traditional festival. Because with technology now and with people almost accepting that Zoom and various other platforms are the way to virtually experience something that is real. And that can be a Van Gogh exhibition in Sydney Art Gallery. This is an opportunity. And only this week on Wednesday, they wrote to me and said, Chris, we've decided to take your advice. We're going to do the first ever cultural dance festival in Zambia. And I was thrilled. Awesome. Because what that does, what I'm hoping it does, is it builds a global community, a community of people who are interested in this, who have never seen this before, who would never have seen this before if it wasn't for COVID-19. So what that will do is it will drive up enthusiasm. In the future, it will drive up demand. It will drive up a sense of, something I want, things that will be on people's wish list that they never ever thought about before. And as we start to regenerate and as we start to put in place environments that ensure that people are safe when they attend these festivals, there's an opportunity here again to actually grow something that didn't exist before in a way that when we actually open the curtains, if you will, and bring it back to reality, you'll have a much broader and wider audience that you could ever have conceived before. So there could be a silver lining in this case.
Yeah, I completely agree. And as I said, it's great to see the silver linings and bringing awareness of these destinations that people have never heard of or even discovered, and being able to showcase what they have to offer. I think it's going to be a new way in how people research travel as well. And we've always spoken about travel as something that you have to pay for before you buy it. You can't try before you buy. You have to make the commitment. And I think it's going to be an interesting new way of how people actually book travel and do choose their destinations, because they may be able to experience a little bit of this culture before they actually do go.
Well, that's the thing. People are searching now more than ever before. It was always, prior to COVID-19, we do it this way because this is the way we do it. Whether we book online on a low-cost airline and Airbnb, or however we do it, this is the way we do it. Now it's different. Now it takes it's a bit harder now. So if it's going to be a bit harder and we're going to be paying a little bit more, we want more for it. We want more value. We want more authenticity. We want more of all of these things that make travel and tourism what it really is, which is, or should be, an immersive experience. So if people have to research and have to try harder, then it can only be good for the industry moving forward. Because, as I said earlier, if we get this right, Kate, then the tourists of the future, the travelers of the future, will be the ambassadors of cultural heritage. They will be the ambassadors of environmental protection. They'll be the ambassadors of wildlife protection, because they'll begin to understand just how precious all of this is. And as I said before, if we allow it, if we exploit it and continue to allow it to be exploited, it will only crumble and fall to pieces. This has been a massive wake-up call, but a wake-up call for both consumers, travelers, and industry to come together and start getting things right.
Completely agree. And I think that is a perfect note to end it on. Thank you so much for joining us today, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure, Kate. And anytime I can be of service to low season traveller, always a pleasure. So enjoy your weekend, and we'll speak soon.
You too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today on the special episode for World Tourism Day. Don't forget to check out our other episodes of Low Season Traveller Insider Guides. Stay safe and healthy, and more now than ever, travel is better without the crowds.